Good evening to all those who have joined already. We've got about 100 people and they're still streaming in, so we're just going to wait a minute or two before we get started. So we'll be started very soon. Thank you so much. Wonderful. We're going to get started because I know there's a lot to talk about tonight. Good evening and good afternoon to our friends on the West Coast. My name is Rob Weinstein and I'm the VP of Development here at Gesu School. I'm delighted to welcome you to our 24th annual symposium. For those that don't know Gesu School, we are an independent Catholic grade school located in North Philadelphia. Our mission is to provide a transformative education for our children from low to moderate income families. One of the things that we've been so proud of is to be one of the leaders in thought and conversation about education in this country. And we've been doing that for 24 years through our symposium. Tonight, we're joined virtually together for the second year in a row. Hopefully next year we'll be together in person and maybe with a live stream so we can again welcome people from around the country. But tonight we're here virtually and we're together to talk about an extremely important issue. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. I want to get right to the evening. So to introduce our speakers is one of Gesu's star alums. I want to introduce Mr. Alfonso Evans Jr.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alfonso Evans Jr., and I'm a proud graduate of Gesu class of 2019 and a founding member of Gesu's new alumni council. I am currently a junior at the Haverford School. Tonight, we will engage in a timely and important conversation about how pandemic-related stress has impacted our school communities, from students to teachers to parents and families. First, I like to share about my experience at Gesu and how this community has helped me become the young man I am today. I started my journey at Gesu in pre-K. Over my 10-year experience at the Gesu School, each administrator instilled in me to be the best I can be and to take advantage of the many activities Gesu provided. While at Gesu, I participated in speech and debate, yearbook club, choir, track, and I was the 2018 to 2019 student council president. Each of these experiences helped my transition into high school as it provided me the confidence to excel in any space, allowed me to hone my leadership skills, and provided me opportunities to find my voice. Right now, I am involved in many activities within my school. Some include the Notables, which is an a cappella traveling ensemble. I am also a coxswain for the Haverford School crew team, where I recently participated in the Head of the Charles Regatta in Boston. I not only had the opportunity to coxswain the Haverford School team, but also the Agnes Irwin's team as well. Gesu impacted my life in immeasurable ways. Within the values and experiences Gesu instilled in me, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I know from my own experience that the pandemic has created challenges that I never imagined facing during high school. The pandemic impacted me personally because my freshman year was cut short. I wasn't able to see my friends or participate in the activities I love the most. I had to navigate my way through the pandemic to ultimately become the better person I am today. I also experienced how the pandemic affected my family overall. My younger sister is in 7th grade at Gesu, and my parents are both school administrators. The stress, uncertainty, and fear of educating, learning, and parenting in this new pandemic environment impacted them as well. Tonight's speakers will discuss how we can work together to address pandemic-related stress in our own schools. Gesu School is pleased to provide this forum to collaborate on this critical topic. We aim to generate a renewed sense of hope and build collective knowledge to forge ahead and strengthen our school communities. I'm honored to briefly introduce tonight's speakers. You can learn more about them on the Symposium's digital program book. Moderating our conversation today is Daryl Ford, head of school at William Penn Charter School. Under his leadership since 2007, the school has expanded programs such as pre-K and a performing arts center, built new and improved athletic facilities, and soon a new lower school. He has led transformations of Penn Charter's campus. Dr. Ford currently sits on the board of AIM Academy and Cliveden of the National Trust. He holds a PhD and a master's from the University of Chicago, as well as a bachelor's and a bachelor's of science from Villanova University. Next, Dr. Marcia Richardson is a clinical psychologist and a professional program administrator. She earned her master's and doctorate degrees in clinical psychology from Widener University. She joined the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania as a seminar leader in the School of Mental Health Counseling program in 2009 and was promoted to full-time lecturer in 2011. Currently, she is the senior lecturer in the Human Development and Quantitative Methods Division at Penn's Graduate School of Education. Previously, she taught in the master's program at Arcadia University and Chestnut Hill College and in LaSalle University's doctoral program. She also served as the community representative of LaSalle's Internal Review Board. Next, Dr. Jabari Whitehead is the principal of Chatham Park Elementary School and the Haverford School District, and an adjunct professor at St. Joseph's University, where he teaches doctoral and master's level courses in educational leadership. With over 20 years of experience as an educator in K through 12 in Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and with 13 years in school leadership, Dr. Whitehead has spent his career dedicated to the growth of his students and community. Dr. Whitehead received his doctorate in educational leadership from St. Joseph's University with a focus on transformational leadership and the socio-cognitive theory of self-efficiency. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ford, Dr. Richardson, and Dr. Whitehead. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Alfonso Evans Jr. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you for those generous introductions. And if you've not gone on to look at the program book for this evening, please do, to see more of the wonderful work at the Gesu School and to hear the Gesu Gospel Choir. It's just a wonderful to learn more and to be here this evening. And I'm thrilled to be here with two colleagues to talk about this important topic, working together to manage pandemic stress in our school communities. And so the way it will work tonight is we will speak for a little bit. I'll ask my esteemed colleagues to answer a few questions, and then we have a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to you. So please make sure to put your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to address them over the next hour, and then we will close up with Brian Carter, the president and CEO of Gesu. And so that's the structure for tonight, but we're so thankful to be here, and we want to thank Alfonso for those kind words and introductions. And so first, I'm going to ask my colleagues, Dr. Marcia Richardson and Dr. Jabari Whitehead, and they say we can call them Marcia and Jabari, and please call me Daryl. We want this to be informal, but we want it to be content rich. And so we are looking forward to a conversation. But the first questions, what are you seeing in this pandemic? And as educators and professionals in the field, what are you doing to respond? How are we responding? And so we each are going to take a few moments to just address that. Marcia, if you'll start, please.
I knew you were going to pick me first. Thank you for this privilege to talk about this. And I was thinking about ways in which to respond to this question, and I was going to write a little speech and so forth. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to bring it real. I'm going to bring it real as a professional scholar, as a parent, and as an individual who shares many experiences that all of you have had during the past 22 months. I've shared it with a couple of people who are here in this room, and last year in particular was really hard on so many levels. As a parent, I can reflect on the past year and kind of laugh at the fact that I said to many people, I survived 10th grade. I literally went through 10th grade all over again because I had to hold my son in my arms on several days for him just to survive the days of virtual learning. It was, excuse my language, pure hell. It was torturous. It was painful as a mother to watch my son suffer and slip into a state of depression during the time of virtual learning. I had that on one hand, but then on the other hand, I had another son who thrived during that time, who really reached deep down into his reserves and was able to literally just shine both academically and socially. And that was all happening under the same roof. And then at work, working in a master's level counseling program where I had to pivot my teaching style to accommodate virtual learning, I was teaching students from all over the world. So my 8:30 a.m. class, some were taking that class at 2 a.m. in the morning, and some were taking it at 10 o'clock at night. And not being able to physically be in the same space with 51 of my students was incredibly difficult. So the social emotional struggles, the financial struggles, the connections that were strained during this past year and a half has taken a toll on so many levels. I give the statistic in my practice, I have 90% of my clients are educators. And during this time, again, pivoting their education, the way they teach, the strain of trying to teach while their 1, 2, 3, 4 children of themselves were in another room trying to learn. I had students of my own who were taking classes while they were sitting in their closet in their bedroom because that was the quietest space that they could find. It's like there's so many endless stories I can share about the struggles that our students, our parents, our educators have endured. It could be more than an hour. So yes.
Thank you. You're up next.
Sure. Well, it's a paradox, right? We've seen everything Marcia spoke about, and we saw some other things as well. So for us in the community, we've saw a lot of the fact that the anxiety, that loss of power, when you don't have control over or influence over your environment, influence over what's occurring, those things really drove any kind of anxiety or depression among families. What we also saw was, paradox, we also saw some other sides of where we saw more leadership come out. We saw communities galvanized together to make sure the connection people were taken care of. We did see the great sense of loss as well, where people had lost the connections with loved ones, where they lost connections with family, and then just the physical loss of people who passed on within the pandemic, well, whether it was from COVID or otherwise. Not being able to see loved ones who were ill at the hospital, if it was COVID, unrelated to COVID, not being able to just to have a physical contact with your grandparents, to hug, or a friend. As far as children goes, having two children of our own, we actually moved during the pandemic, during the quarantine time, and it was just a moment of where finding ways to reconnect. Fortunately, if their children were involved in sports, there were coaches and organizations out there finding new ways to make sure they kept the connections going. I will speak to the truth of the matter. The largest struggle that we're seeing is just the leadership of self, to be able to understand who you are when everything that we tied our identity to was stripped away. And I see that in the teachers who really identify with their work and take that work home with them, especially when they want to do their best, when they want to give their best effort, but now they're asked to do something that they're first feeling incompetent at, where they don't have the usual control, and being able to balance that. We also had to redefine what productivity means. We had to shift what actually our work is. So when we once before were looking at the 1, 2, 3 ABCs, now it's just teaching people or children how to do school, to get along with another person, to be able to communicate face to face. So those types of things are all new. It changed the work, where the work in leadership was about managing anxiety of the community members, of the parents, of the children, and of the teachers and staff. And that became what was most important. We really learned together what was most essential. And it really came down to how do we address the situation. Our response is really to go inward and take a look at at least five things that really help to identify what we had within our control. And those things for us, it was about sleep, nutrition, mindset, relationships, movement, exercise, and so sleep, nutrition, movement, exercise, mindset, relationships. Those were the pieces that we have control over, and really being able to take care of those things went a long way. So you may have heard the phrase from Brene Brown, "Be brave, not perfect." We truly ran with it. The good thing, we started at before the pandemic, bought into that, but it really was a force for us because we knew we were in uncharted territory. And as we moved together as a community, we just felt that we weren't alone, and we were all making these mistakes, and we were growing together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say we saw similar things in my school community that Marcia and Jabari have spoken to. I think, you've talked about the loss, you've talked about the anxiety. we had a real reminder that much of the work of schools is the work of math and English and history and foreign language, but it's also the work of students being together. And so we saw that and the impact of students not being able to be together. And, and COVID did not discriminate across school sectors. And so we all, I think, were struggling with responses. And so I think one of the things that we did to try to do to respond for both our faculty and our students is to give people permission not to have to follow the perfect curriculum and to get everything done, which of course, for some of us, the stakes are really high. We have to get everything done. But the amount of stress and anxiety versus following a traditional course of work, we just had to readjust. And so that was one thing, to give permission to people to do your best, but also it's okay. This is gonna look different for everyone. The other thing that I think we tried to do was not to catastrophize all of this. We as adults had to figure out how to make sense of this while we were struggling, but how do we make sense of this for the students that we serve? Marcia, I saw you were gonna jump in. Response, what can you do to help support?
I think that one of the things that I tried to emphasize, regardless of who I was talking to, grace, compassion, and patience. Those were the three words that kept resonating for me throughout, this past year and a half. Grace, compassion, and patience when I reached out to my son's teachers and would ask questions such as, are we really hung up on submitting that math worksheet on time? Like, the kid is doing something. Why ding him for lateness on a worksheet? Grace, compassion, and patience. I think I saw a significant pivot from, demanding producing product, homework assignments, active participation behind a screen and so forth. And one of my son's teachers, and I really have to give a shout out, the basis of all of any recommendations or any ideas is rooted in relationships. And I loved the fact that one particular teacher in mind, she did a check-in, not just for my son, but also for me. She literally tutored me on a math concept so that I can then show my son how to do it. She emailed me resources. She, gave me links and the password to her math book online because she knew how active I was and wanted to be in supporting my son and sustaining and maintaining. And it was really helpful. And it's interesting because as my son reflects on this past year, he said to me not too long ago, if it wasn't for her checking up on me outside of the class, I probably would have failed and I probably would not have cared. I was like, wow, that speaks volume. So grace, compassion, and patience, not only for those with whom you're working with or teaching, but also for yourself. That radical self-compassion is definitely important.
So I see two questions that have popped in early. And so I think they're kind of a similar vein. And so they're about reentry. And so one question is, how should we be doing things differently for our students this year? Should we be teaching differently? Should we have adjusted expectations for this year given last year? So that's one question. And the other question is a little bit more specific at the college level, working in higher education. I see the challenges that students are having coming back to fully in-person learning. And are there any lessons? Are there things we should change? And also, are there examples of resiliency that we are seeing? And so I'll just start and would say that we've had kids who've not done regular school for several years. And we see a lot of students who need more scaffolding, especially at the times of transitions. And so we've had to huddle with grade teams and teaching teams and be much more clear and specific, and called in parents to say, this was in 4th grade, they were just fine. But in 6th grade, we've lost a little bit of knowing how to do school. And so do you have any thoughts about the reentry here?
I'll speak to this where Jess was just saying, learning how to do school, we actually had to go through and reset our expectations, reset how we operate in our building. We reestablish our core values of caring, trust, respect, family, and responsibility. So we had to reset and talk about what does that look like at all the grade levels, and make sure they're out front in our lessons, whether it's in our responsive classroom, taking time and looking at, you mentioned transitions, really looking at how can we stabilize things for our students so they're not feeling the anxiety of being on all the time, looking at the clock watching, wondering what's next. But you went also, earlier on you mentioned permission, which was a huge word. And Marcia mentioned grace. Both things, because our teachers want to do well, and just the idea that everyone wants to show up and play big, is that giving the permission to be human, giving permission to collaborate, giving permission not to have all the answers. And when we know better, we do better. So when we had the idea of, how much more hands-on learning do we need for students? How much should we take in more? How much student voice should we add in the learning from their experiences? How much feedback should we be taking? How to strengthen our partnerships with the community more, because they were showing up in times in the height of the pandemic. And now, how do we build those connections? What content really matters? What type of work, meaningful work, what type of assignments really matter? If we're going to utilize that energy of time at home, how do we provide work that's respectful to the child, to the community, to make sure that that child can be independent and engage in the learning? And also had to recalibrate. I know we have all these ideas of what parental involvement looks like. I would say the surge capacity is gone. The fact that everyone, they had that energy ready to go before, but now just recalibrate and take a look at how do we really want to involve our parents. Sometimes we have these like homework sheets that go home, the projects that are really for the parent or really for the child. And it comes from a loving place. We come from the fact that we want to give these experiences to our learners, but at the same time, we take a step back. And also, last piece before I stop is just looking at our strategic vision, our strategic goals, and making sure that we're in alignment with those, with the mission for our community, for our learners, for our students.
Yeah, I think Jabari, I hear all that, and I think what schools struggle with is you have that capacity to do that within the community of the school, but what are the competing demands outside of that school, like standardized testing, for one. So I give the example of, I am blessed in that I can travel through various environments in my professional and personal life. So for example, I'm a residential fellow in our undergrad dorm at Penn. So I technically live with 3,000 freshmen. Very interesting experience. I live with 2 teenage boys. Another interesting experience. I teach graduate level students. Another very interesting experience. And I see, when I talk about standardized testing, where does that fit in? Recognizing that I have a teacher in my practice who's struggling trying to teach 2nd graders how to spell their name, how to identify written words, because 2nd grade is the first time that these kids ever step foot in a brick and mortar building to be educated. And so, I think there's this expectation that oh yeah, we're going to go back to normal. Well, there's no such thing as going back to normal. We have to identify what a new normal is. And that many of our children are, the past expectation that I have a 10th grader and therefore he's using that 10th grade muscle that was built upon 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. But 8th and 9th grade were challenged because of the pandemic. And so I think systems need to reset and adjust so that I call them our babies, so that our children and our students can adjust. I don't see us, and I don't think we should try to go back to the old way of things, but it takes a systems change beyond our school, beyond our families, and so forth. So how can we appeal to the larger powers to be?
Perhaps I can ask the question of you, Jabari, about the reset. And then Marcia, I'm going to come to you about a question. I see several questions about the role of the parent, especially in higher education. A question from a parent who is a parent of a Gesu alum who's now in college. And so let's start with the reset question. And so there are several questions about how do we reset our expectations without lowering educational expectations? How do we, educational goals, how do we reset and then try to make certain that our students are prepared for the next grade and for college? And so several questions like that. How will high schools adapt and will colleges adapt? And so Jabari, maybe if you could take that on a little bit more, and then Marcia, I'm going to come to you and say, what advice might you give to parents of young students, but also those in college who need some guidance and scaffolding? But Jabari, the reset and expectations.
So I'll take this from as a parent and an educator. I think first of all, we have to ask ourselves what our intentions are as parents, as the adults. It can be very dangerous when there's already a documentary out there called Race to Nowhere. It's very dangerous when we treat our children as racehorses. I've heard that phrase recently, just in one of the podcasts I listened to, but it just rang true that our children are not our prized possession. We don't put them out and say, hey, look at us, look what we did. And we have children in our house who play lacrosse, soccer, they're great students. They would hit all the checklists. But there are times that we have to pause and ask, are there any gifted classes for who? For us? They need to take these, build the transcript for who? For us? Is it for the adults? Or do we really know our children? Do we really know who they are? And the great thing about, and I'll go back, the great thing about being in quarantine, when all that was stripped away, we couldn't get to that. You really had a chance to see who your children are. So first, the reset starts with the adults, our own intention for our children and what it means. So then we reset the parameters of, again, what does it mean to be productive at school? Are children able to manage the task before them, managing their, what is realistic for them to be able to complete, and modeling. I think for the adults, modeling the behavior. It's very easy to teach our children to be unhappy, right? So because the children, for what I see, for the most part, are able to handle what we put before them when it's logical and sensible. When it comes from external, as Marcia mentioned, when it comes from external, we have to play a role of the buffer to make sure that the folks know what is most essential. So we're focusing on that character. I think as a school, how we can help the families and the teachers is by controlling the narrative. So if you have core values, if you have core beliefs, we establish them together as a school community, and we model them for children. It becomes part of our language. And then we also find times and connect with the people in the trenches with the teachers. We talk about what's feasible. How do we put these into action? What does it look like? Where does it fit into the curriculum to make sure that our children can be both have that radical self-love, as Marcia spoke about, and also approach to work. So it's removing those extraneous variables, and then when we remove the junk, then we can focus on those critical thinking opportunities the high level, the rigor of the rigorous learning that is there. But I do caution against the idea of going backwards, because even before the pandemic, it was about the hurried life, the hurried child. Rushing here and there, and not really understanding who our children are, because in many cases we don't understand who we are as people, because whatever the identity that we've adopted through our own lives. I think also not focusing on the performative language with students. Because if we're talking about, there's been plenty of work about grit. There's been plenty of work that talks about, work ethic. If and also mindset. If we talk to our children about things within their control, which is, their effort, and provide the framework and vehicle to help them grow, and also get out of their way. If we get out of the children and provide the guardrails, they go so much further. But modeling the mindset, giving opportunities for students to find an entry point, giving opportunities for student voice, and empowering them helps us reset as community, as school community, and individually.
That's very helpful. I think the notion of, what is essential for the learning. A lot was laid bare during COVID, and to your point, Marcia, the worksheet, is that what's most essential, or is there another type of assessment? I think, we will get to some silver linings in a bit, but there's the questions which you just answered, Jabari, this expectation, the conflict between high expectations and empathy. How do we do that? And Marcia, we had two questions at the higher ed level about, is it appropriate for teachers, for parents at that level to intervene? Is it appropriate? And how do you help your children? And so, I can read
that's a sticky question, considering issues of confidentiality. I've this year I've had a couple of parents call me directly, asking me how their children are doing academically, and by law I can't give that information. I know that they are probably funding the education, and so they want to know how their children are doing. But I can't give that information, but I can encourage the child to communicate to the parent.
So specifically, Marcia, the person framed it just a little bit differently. Do I call the professor and let them know she's not getting chemistry lab virtually, which is different than my child?
I would encourage the parent to talk to the child about ways in which they can advocate for themselves in the school setting.
Sure.
Perfect example, I just had a meeting with my students in the freshman dorm, and they were talking about the struggles that they've had with trying to communicate to their professors. So I'm literally giving them, suggestions and role playing how to approach the professor or the TA, but it's really trying to empower the young person. Because let's face it, parents, we're not always going to be there for our kids to be the champion for their cause, but we can teach them the skills necessary to be able to address, confront, acknowledge, and advocate for ourselves. That, there's great intention there in trying to, make known what the needs are of the child, but try to help the child be able to do that for themselves. I would make that suggestion.
Marcia, we have a great question that was submitted to us last night. And given your work as a mental health professional, at what point does stress become recognizable as trauma? And when does it make sense to speak to a public health official about it becoming trauma? When does it make sense to speak of as public health trauma?
Right.
In terms of pandemic?
So I think it's safe to say that we experienced and are experiencing a global traumatic event with regards to this pandemic. Each of us have our unique ways of reacting to that traumatic event. For some, we have the capability and the coping skills to be able to, protect ourselves and to respond in a way that, maintains our physical and mental health. And for others, it can be an extreme challenge. So one of my favorite phrases that I use in class, and my students hate it, is "it depends." It depends upon the unique individual. It depends upon how impactful these situations are on their overall functioning. It depends upon what was happening before, as far as how were they behaving, how were they thinking, how were they feeling before this traumatic experience, and what's happening now. How are their relationships impacted? How are their overall behavior impacting? How is their ability to learn impacted? If you see some, shifts and, dramatic changes, seek help, ask for help in a heartbeat. It doesn't necessarily have to start with a professional. You could reach out to, if it's a school age child, reach out to the many resources that the school has. The child's pediatrician, there's so many different levels of resources to be able to wrap supports around that individual. So it's a unique experience.
Can I connect with Marcia on this?
Oh, of course.
I think that that battle, that mental battle in these times, when people spend so much time with themselves, with your inner thoughts, that governor, that her Dave Goggins always refers to as the governor, or the petty tyrant in your head, being able to find ways to quiet that and recognize those response patterns. I know with our teachers, we get taught the same lesson over and over again without recognizing our response patterns and finding ways to manage it, because that self-awareness allows us to step forward. And some tools, such as journaling, has been beneficial, being able to clear those thoughts out, creating those routines, as far as improving your sleep or pieces, and deepening relationships. Finding ways to deepen your relationship and connect with people who are positive, who speak life into your life, can go a long way. But when we are taught to suppress those emotions and leave those emotions unresolved, they have to find somewhere to go. And the fact is that if we don't deal with those, it does then turn into the trauma that we're speaking of.
Yeah.
We have a question that's a really on the ground question, and it really speaks to kind of the school as an organization, the school as a system. And the question is, students are now talking about who is vaxxed and who isn't, and passing judgment towards each other either way. What is your recommendation to best handle this in the school, aside from communication to the parents about talking to their children?
Can I say one thing as far as that? If I was a teacher and I observed that happening in my classroom, my first inclination would be to try to understand the motivation behind the behavior. And I would interpret that as issues of safety and concern, as far as, how to respond. It would probably be, you know what? I hear you asking these questions and I hear you spreading these rumors. And I'm wondering if it's because you are feeling unsafe or you are worried about contracting the virus or what have you. I would, try to address it one-on-one with that child. And then, possibly include the parents in that kind of conversation. I actually have this experience going on right now at the graduate level, where students are talking about who's vaccinated and who's not. And I literally stopped the class because this one particular person was really struggling with all of this. And I said, I'm wondering if this is coming from a place of anxiety about you feeling safe in this space. And so what can we do other than dig into people's personal medical lives, we walk out in the street and we don't know who is vaccinated or not. We go into the grocery store, we don't know who's vaccinated or not. And so kind of generalizing it that way, I think kind of helped both the person who was targeted as well as the person who was expressing these concerns. So.
We have a question about advice for a teacher. What advice can you provide for teacher candidates who are out in schools this year, but don't know any other normal other than this year?
Well, I think, first of all, as these teacher candidates, we rise to the level of our preparation. What I mean by that is, as they're going out to look for opportunities, realize and do the research about which community that you want to apply for, understand what that community has went through, whether it's in their strategic plan, whether it's in a website, whether it's through the school's information, get a sense for that community so that when those opportunities arise, that you are prepared, that you've done the work, that you've accessed resources and sought mentors. I don't think we do that enough. I don't think we seek enough mentors. I think someone did this service with the phrase, I know growing up, once the phrase old head got thrown out there, not that a loss for respect for elders, in the sense that we're not promoting, seeking those mentors to get feedback from about what's going on in school, how best to approach it. But joining a professional organization that's affordable, connecting with mentors who are already in the work, finding ways to shadow or connect with schools that allow some kind of observation or vision, but fully taking advantage of those opportunities, and then be aggressive, take initiative, reach out to administrators, reach out to school leaders to find out, pick their brain. So I know in hiring teachers, it's great to know that someone's putting in the work, that they want to learn more, because I want to hire a learner. I'm not, content is one thing, but if I can hire a learner, if I get that someone with a common sense degree, then it's going to do very well. And me understanding that our values are connecting and that we're ready to go and move forward. So I think find mentors, do your research, gather information, and take initiative and be hungry.
Yeah,
I think
Darryl, I think this question kind of sort of like segues into the silver linings. I shared with my counselors in training that they are a unique cohort and that they had to pivot in the way they help other people. And that is through telemental health, using virtual platforms to help other people. The cohort before them didn't know anything about it. And this current cohort isn't doing too much of that kind of work. But those who've been educated through the pandemic had to learn various technology in their, in exerting their practice. And as far as, teacher candidates, piggybacking off of what Jabari said, finding a village, surround yourself with seasoned educators, as well as other colleagues who are going through the same journey, and create a supportive network where you meet and find ways to reflect on your practice is something that can be extremely helpful.
There are a couple questions in here that I think are important to get to, and then let's go back to silver linings, and we'll try our best to get to as many as we can. But one question again is directed: what are strategies we can teach students? And so if we'll each just take a go round about this. And so one strategy, I would say that while we're trying to deal with the academic work and rigor and anxiety and stress, and you mentioned this, Jabari, earlier, probably have to work even harder at the getting outside and exercising and getting appropriate sleep. And that is something you can control. That's a strategy. I think another strategy for me is really about, it's hard for students, but constantly being in communications with faculty, their parents, whomever. It could be a trusted aunt or an uncle. But this is the time to reach out more than to go inward. So those are two strategies I might raise up. How about you, Marcia and Jabari?
Well, I think the deepening of relationships goes a long way. The deepen, I would say, it's the deepening relationships that are positive, that iron sharpens iron. Getting your for children, getting them around positive, other positive children, other positive opportunities, and helping them find a space for what they can be proud of. I often ask our community to ask their children, what are the three things they love about themselves? What are three things they love about themselves? Because we don't want them seeking constant external validation. We want them to be able to walk in the door and know who they are, what they love about themselves, that nobody else can change, and that they're setting their own compass. If we're able to do that, that can be their mindset for the classroom. We talk to our kids about green light, yellow light, red light friends. Being able to identify who is your circle, try to remove them out of the world as like everybody being their BFFs. So trying to help them recognize what real relationships are. And as far as the classroom and managing school, is be realistic about what it is children are ready for. Drop the idea of ability and take a look at the child's readiness. Let's talk about what they're actually ready for, and are they in a position to take on specific challenges. And the last piece here for this is for parents. Comparison is the enemy of joy, and the enemy of relationships and the thief of joy. So with as much as possible, avoiding comparing our children to each other, to their peers, realizing that our children have their own unique journey. My son, I'll use this phrase, pardon me, but my son likes to joke around and tell me he was the tadpole that made it. So when in his idea that he won, and he's not going anywhere. So I have my son's name Evan. We only have one and only Evan. And if we can realize that these are gifts, then we can strengthen and empower our children through who they are already.
I love it. You have an Evan. I have an Evan.
Does he live out loud?
He lives. Actually, no. He's my quiet one. But I have an Evan too. That is so funny. I didn't know that.
Marcia, any other strategies we can teach students? Anything to raise up?
I think that it takes a village, and I think the adults have to continuously show up for our kids, whether it's through modeling. How do I model self-care? How do I model effective communication? How do I model self-compassion? Like, I'm a big fan of acknowledging that while I'm standing up in front of you teaching, I can make mistakes, and I own up to it. And I, correct myself in front of you. And so, being that vulnerable and showing that it's okay to be vulnerable. Other strategies, I think I have a couple of members of my Speak Up family in the audience. And one of the things that they really press upon in the work that they do is helping children identify at least one trusting adult in their life, whether it's someone in their family, immediate family, extended family, in the school. Who is that trusted adult? Who can they go to and be vulnerable and talk stuff out? I think that is, and help. I always ask my boys, if you can't come to mom and dad with any of your issues or problems or concerns, who else can you go to? And they'll let me know. And then I actually reach out to that person to say, just to let you know, Colin said you're it if he can't, connect for whatever reason. So
I'm going to flip that just for an observation of, perhaps something we can do at the school level. And so we always want students, family members to find that trusted adult. But I think something else that's even more critical right now is that there are multiple adults in our schools who know multiple children really well. It's one thing to know them in the math class or the English class, but to know them in the math class, in the chess club, and on the soccer field. That's what, these times call for more connections. And so we're going to take just a few more questions. We have a little bit of an exchange in the chat of questions about, what should we do when the teachers, the organization shows no compassion, no empathy. And it really has gone from just a troubling, difficult situation that we all are in to perhaps a mental health situation. And so I know that our panelists have responded in the chat, but maybe Marcia, you could take that on about how do we help people when it moves into mental health, trauma, non-production, just what suggestions would you have in that regard?
I think it really depends upon the context of what the environment is. If it's at a college level, every single college has some type of student intervention service or a counseling department. It is appropriate for a parent to reach out to those departments to say, hey, I need someone to check in with my child. My child needs support. Encourage the child to reach out to their division advisor. It depends upon the context, and identifying who those resources are.
I know,
and I'd be happy to help, answer that question more fully if I knew the extent of what the specific situation is.
Great, and so maybe we can make that connection. I know that my wife and I have a college son, and we have a junior, and trying to figure this all out. First year of normal college, sophomore year for him, I felt like I had to lay eyes on him. I got in the car and went and went to a basketball game with him just so that I could spend time to see where he was at, because sometimes it's really hard for parents to discern. And so I'm not a helicopter parent,
right?
But sometimes I'm a show up parent to lay eyes.
So that speaks to create a safety plan for your child if they're in college. If I don't hear from you across a span of 48 hours or 72 hours, I'm going to take it to the next level of reaching out to your hall residential advisor or your roommate or student support services, just so that they can do a wellness check on you. If I can't get in my car or hop on a plane to go see you, because some college campuses have restrictions on outside people, walking around the campus.
And while we would all love to be together in person right now, Zoom has really helped in this regard in many, many ways. And so as we conclude, and before we go to Brian Carter for his ending this evening, just perhaps very quickly, one last thought, summary thought, and a silver lining. Any silver linings?
I didn't want to leave without expressing everything. The truth of all this has brought me to understand how we need to be a factor in our lives, and because we're all still learning, one of the things that was very helpful as a takeaway was that think about the word factor. F was like freeing yourself from your past. A was accepting who you are. C was connecting. For me, deepening those connections with others. T was truth and being truthful about who we are and what we need for ourselves. The O was optimism, because there was silver lining. We had opportunity to see our teachers become leaders. We saw that our children are not really fragile, and that they're actually able to grow and learn without all the external variables that are there as well. And then R is resilience, was just the fact that being resilient keeps showing up like our adults. So the silver lining is that we've learned a lot, and willing that we moving forward, that we don't face anything like this ever again. You know,
In this lifetime.
yeah, right, in this lifetime, and that that we're able to be stronger and we're seeing many examples of that.
Thank you. Marcia, a final thought in the silver lining?
I think the silver lining has been the increased awareness of the social emotional factors in both our children and adults. It's being talked about more. It's being recognized more. It's being appreciated more. There's more conversations about ways in which we can support our students' social emotional development. And I think there's also an increase in the conversation about what it means to support educators, not just, through financial means and, giving them an extra 10-minute break and things like that, but what does it mean to support our teachers' social emotional well-being as they do the tough work? And so to me, that has been the greatest silver lining in all of this.
I would say, I see two final questions. Due to the pandemic, what are the long-term academic effects that teachers should expect to see? I'm not so sure we know those long-term academic effects. I also know from colleagues who are on this panel, for those of us who are working in situations where our students have to learn more than a year's worth of work in a year's worth of instruction. I ran a school in Chicago for students who were not in a good system, and we had to play catch up all the time. And we had to make sure that the arc of catch up matched up and aligned with our academic calendar. And so I don't think we know the long-term effects yet, but unfortunately, the burden's going to fall to us to do this. But I think it needs to be done over an arc of time. We can't fix this all overnight. We are still in a global pandemic. And so I just put that out there. I would say that and there are parents out there who cannot be available, who aren't available. And so again, it's how do we reach out to relatives or the neighbor or the teacher who takes on yet another burden? But we are in this time when we need to figure out how do we try to support all of our students. And the silver lining that I would say is, I walked through the halls this year and I see how important being back together for my students is. And so I see students who are smiling again and saying hello. I say hello 300 times a day because that's a lesson that I can teach in the hallways. And I see students making eye contact again. And this tells me that perhaps students aren't taking for granted the thing that is their job, and that's to go to school. And we're talking about that. And so we're raising that up. It's not perfect. We're not out of this pandemic, but I see great appreciation for the efforts of teachers. Silver lining. I see great appreciation for the effort of school nurses. Silver lining. And again, we're not there yet, but I thank God that I see our students making eye contact and understanding and appreciating each other in ways that I don't think we would have ever been there if we had not been in this pandemic. So we want to thank everyone for being here. Brian Carter, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ford, and thank you, Dr. Whitehead and Dr. Richardson. This topic of working to manage pandemic-related stress in schools in our communities is an important discussion. And the topic is especially relevant in my mind as we approach the holiday seasons. And when you look at over the last 2 years, school and faculty and staff, they've been pulled in a lot of different directions over the last 2 years. We have our teachers and faculty, they're social distance patrol, they're teaching virtual, they're teaching children in the classroom simultaneously as they're teaching children at home. And now, as you mentioned, Daryl, it's wonderful to have, we have 430 children in the school building every day. And our teachers, despite all that they've gone through, they show up every day with a smile on their face, ready to teach long division. But what we can't do is we can't underestimate or ignore the impact of the pandemic on our teachers, on their personal lives, on those of the faculty and the staff that can present itself, as we talked about earlier, in ways of stress and trauma and burnout. So, we as school communities have to really, really focus and pay attention to that. And we sometimes have to let our parents know the hard work that's being done in the building. And while they're not there to observe it, it's hard work. It's much more difficult. A difficult job is much more difficult now in terms of pandemic stress. But we also have to take into consideration our families. And families have lost jobs. Families have childcare issues. If you have to quarantine a class now, that presents a childcare issue for the family. And families have lost loved ones due to COVID. So all of these things we have to take into consideration as we try to manage the pandemic stress. And the silver linings, they kind of all meld together. Dr. Whitehead, you talked about relationships. And Dr. Richardson, you talked about it takes a village. And Dr. Ford, you talked about more connections. And I think, again, especially as we go into the holiday season where other stresses will pile on top of the pandemic stress, if we can work to identify relationships where we can talk to people about what we're experiencing and they can talk to us about what they're experiencing. And I love what you talked about, Dr. Ford, about making more connections. So, we had an alumni council meeting last night, and I learned that one of our young ladies is on the varsity basketball team at the Baldwin School. Well, I'm going to pop up, unbeknownst to her, I'm going to look at the schedule and pop up, and she'll see me in the stands there to cheer her on. So I think the relationship piece is what's most critical. You talked about speak up, Dr. Richardson, and that's what we have to do. Don't hold it inside of us. Identify people that we can share with, and they can share with us. So again, I appreciate all that joined us. More than 190 people were on tonight. I appreciate your wisdom, Dr. Richardson, Dr. Whitehead, and Dr. Ford. And I especially want to thank our sponsors for whom this would not be possible for us to put on each and every year. And this year, our Symposium valedictorian sponsors, Cozen O'Connor and M&S Foundation, and then our Symposium Friends, which is our school partners, the Academy of Notre Dame, the Episcopal Academy, Girard College, Malvern Preparatory School, Marian Mercy Academy, St. Joseph's Preparatory School, and the Shipley School. So thank you for participating in the conversation. Thank you, panel, for leading us in the conversation and sharing those silver linings. Have a wonderful evening and have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone. See you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.